Good morning, friends. Welcome to Wake Up in the Word for a Monday, Labor Day 2025. Hey, grab a good cup of coffee and join me over in the book of Romans, chapter 2. We'll pick up where we left off on Friday. Hope everything is well with you. We've had a marvelous weekend. Had a great moving day on Saturday. The Lord gave us great weather, gave us great friends. James and Jennifer Kane, thank you so much for showing up to help us, along with Libby and two of our grandkids, Addison and Cooper. And we got an awful lot done on Saturday, so thank you so much. We're in the middle of not just unpacking here, but a few other odds and ends we've got to move off the other property, all getting finished by the 15th of this month. So your continued prayers are appreciated. But in the meantime, we're back in the book of Romans after a wonderful weekend. And I say wonderful, if you're a Georgia Tech fan, we thought it was especially wonderful because we beat those Colorado Buffaloes despite some early turnovers, 27-20. So yay, Yellow Jackets. And then for some of the rest of you, you're having a good time. Our South Carolina friends who love the fact that the Gamecocks won this weekend. Clemson got stomped. Oh my goodness, they kind of messed up some things and were beaten. So, whoever your favorite team was, it's been quite a strange weekend. Probably the biggest upset of all. Who would have thought Alabama would lose their first game to Florida State? You don't know if you need to be concerned about Alabama or brag on Florida State. So, but any way it goes, friends, college football is upon us, and that means everything goes crazy this fall, right on up until there's a championship. But in the meantime, we, of course, on the Lord's Day, had the privilege of worshiping at one of our great churches in Carolina Baptist Association, the Valley Hill Baptist Church, with Pastor David Woody. Had a great time with them observing the Lord's Supper as a part of their fifth Sunday communion service. And really enjoyed worshiping with those folks. And I have to tell you a little bit about this. Of course, Terry Baker is the minister of music there and does a great job in providing musical instruments for youngsters. If you donate one of your old musical instruments, he will find a home in a youngster that can be trained and learn how to love, appreciate music, and hopefully play it to the glory of God early on. And these are some of the ones that can't afford to purchase those instruments on their own. So, Terry, what a great ministry you guys have got there, and I appreciate what you're doing. And we're back in Romans chapter 2 today. I know it's a lengthy introduction, but listen, it's been a weekend full of good things, along with some of the other stuff that we have to tolerate in the news cycle. But when we get back to Romans 2, we're picking up right there where we left off when, God has been made plain to all of us as no respecter of persons. He shows no favoritism from the Jews to the Gentiles. Now, the Jews weren't exactly happy about this. They wanted to say, look, because we're the chosen people of God, we have the law, we ought to have a special place. We ought to have priority. There ought to be one way to judge us and another way to judge Gentiles, and they deserve the harsher treatment. We deserve a break because we're your people, God. We're the Jews. We've got the law. And these folks that were so adamant about that are those that Paul is addressing for the most part here in Romans chapter 2. Now we pick up there in verse number 12, for it says, "For all who sin without the law will also perish without the law. All who sin under the law will be judged by the law. For the hearers of the law are not righteous before God, but the doers of the law will be justified. So when Gentiles who do not by nature have the law do what the law demands, they are a law to themselves, even though they do not have the law." Now, of course, the law we're talking about isn't your local ordinances. We're talking about the law of God. We're talking about the Ten Commandments, all the Mosaic commands that have been given. The Jews have all this in writing, but the Gentiles quite often live by the same standards. They will say that stealing is wrong, murder is wrong, coveting is wrong, adultery is wrong. And many times these things are displayed in their cultures, even though they do not have the Jewish law. So what does he say about this? Verse 15, "They show that the work of the law is written on their hearts. Their consciences confirm this. Their competing thoughts either accuse or even excuse them on the day when God judges what people have kept secret according to my gospel through Jesus Christ. So he's saying, God made you to understand right from wrong, and you do have a conscience given you by God. And it's amazing to see how folks understand right from wrong. You do not, for the most part, have to tell a sinner he's a sinner because he knows he's done wrong things. You just have to say, here's what sin gets you, okay? Now, that's coming up in another chapter. But in verse 17, watch what he says to these folks that are so wrapped up in this idea of their Jewishness that they can't quite see out of the forest for the trees, okay? And remember, this is a passage that contains what we're about to start here. Talk about a run-on sentence. This sentence goes on for a while, so your English teacher wouldn't be happy with this. But listen to the way Paul puts this. He has to get all of this thought in one sentence. He says, now, if you call yourself a Jew and rely on the law and boast in God and know his will and approve the things that are superior, being instructed from the law, and if you are convinced that you are a guide for the blind, a light for those in darkness, an instructor of the ignorant, a teacher of the immature, having the embodiment of knowledge and truth in the law, you then who teach another, don't you teach yourself? Okay, get a breath and see where he's going with this, because basically he's saying you're bragging on what you've got, but how are you living? Don't you teach yourself? He says, you who preach, you must not steal. Do you steal? You who say you must not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who detest idols, do you rob temples? You who boast in the law, do you dishonor God by breaking the law? For as it is written, the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. So Paul goes back to quote Isaiah from the Old Testament to say, look, this is true even today as it was in Isaiah's day. The Gentiles are able to blaspheme the name of God because they look at you and your hypocritical lifestyle. You preach one thing and you do another. And because of that, they are able to say, see, this God must not be real. I mean, surely he punished these characters for living in a lifestyle that's completely opposite to what they're teaching. What's he trying to say here? I love the way Evans puts this. He said, the Jews felt that because they had the law, they were superior, but having the law only made them more self-righteous and hypocritical. External religion without internal conversion has absolutely no value to God. He never intended for his people to simply memorize his law. He intends for us instead to keep it, and we can only do that when we are changed from the inside out. And perhaps the most tragic result of the Jews dishonoring God was this terrible witness to the world. May the hypocrisy of the saved never keep the gospel from getting to the lost. So look how he begins to transmit this over to us. Yes, it's something we need to pay attention to for those of you who are saying, that's right, those Jews had a problem back then, didn't they? And I love a little bit about Raymond Carlson here, where he says, look, the Jews who claim to be leaders for the true worship of God became the instruments to provoke the nations to blasphemy. This solemn and searching charge should startle all who profess the name of Christian. Those who profess to be possessors of the truth should not parade lip service without exemplifying standards of holy living. And if you go out into the realm of history, and you look down through it, you'll discover over and over people who claim the name of Christ, claim to be Christian, but did exactly the opposite of what the Bible teaches, and they have put a stain on the reputation of the church over and over and over again. Friends, that's what we have to be careful of today. This hypocrisy wasn't limited to just the Jews of Paul's day. It's something that he had to warn even the early church about. It's something you and I need to take note of. Do we preach one thing and do another? That'll cause problems and bitterness in your own family, with your own kids, and in society, and with your neighbors and your friends, and everyone who will say, hey, that guy goes to such and such a church, and yet look at the way he does business. Look at the way he will lie to you when selling you a car. Yeah, I've had that happen from a Baptist deacon. Look at how he will, turn these things around. What does that do to the testimony of Jesus Christ? And what does it do when it comes to spreading the gospel? It's a hindrance that we don't need to see happening. Now, you can't solve that problem in everybody else's life, but today, my friends, you can take care of home base. You can make sure that you are not the hypocrite that people are pointing to when they're using it as an excuse to reject God. Well, God bless you. I'll see you again right here tomorrow when we continue in this delightful book of Romans as we wake up in God's Word. You have a great day.